The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the chief engineer of the Vreen finished his presentation. His six-fingered hands gestured at the holographic display, showing complex equations and simulations. And so, esteemed colleagues, I conclude that a planetary defense system capable of deflecting or neutralizing celestial bodies of Class 5 magnitude or greater is simply impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of an average star system, not to mention the quantum instability issues we've documented in our 3-century study. The Vreen's skin shifted from confident blue to a smug purple. Around the circular table, representatives from 24 spacefaring civilizations nodded in agreement. The Orhan delegate, a being composed of crystalline structures, chimed in with a musical tone. Our scientists concur. The laws of physics do not bend to wishful thinking. We should focus on early detection and evacuation protocols instead. Captain Jack Miller sat quietly at the human section, the newest addition to the council. Earth had only gained membership 30 years ago, making humans the youngest species represented. He listened carefully, making notes on his datapad, while the aliens discussed theoretical limitations as if they were absolute law. Miller was no scientist. He was a military man chosen to represent Earth because of his calm demeanor and diplomatic skills. But something about the dismissive tone of the older species bothered him. Humanity hadn't survived its turbulent history by accepting limitations. Does the human representative have anything to add? The council moderator, a tall, willowy being, turned its attention to Miller. Standing up, Miller cleared his throat. Thank you, moderator. Earth appreciates the detailed analysis from our esteemed colleagues. We will study your findings with great interest. He sat down without elaborating further. No need to reveal Earth's plans just yet, especially when those plans weren't fully formed. The meeting with General Powell didn't go well. The holographic projection of Earth's defense chief looked grim as Miller finished his report. So they all agree it can't be done? Powell asked, her weathered face betraying concern. Unanimously, Miller replied. The Vreen were particularly insistent. Their civilization has been studying this problem for over 300 years. Powell's image flickered as she reached for something off-screen. Well, that's inconvenient timing. I've just received the latest data package from Deep Space Observatory 6. Miller's stomach tightened. How bad? It's confirmed. Object designation Doomfall is on a direct intercept course with our solar system. Initial measurements put it at approximately 300 kilometers in diameter, composed primarily of dense metals and ice. Current trajectory will bring it through the heart of our system in about 5 years. Evacuation plans? Miller asked, though he already knew the answer. With current technology, we could maybe save 10 million people. Out of 10 billion, Powell's voice was flat. And that's assuming we get help with transport ships from the council races. Miller leaned back in his chair, looking out the viewport of his quarters at the endless starfield. 5 years to solve a problem that apparently couldn't be solved. Send me everything we have on defense system concepts. Everything, even the crazy stuff that got rejected. There's no point, Jack. You heard the experts. It can't be done. Miller smiled thinly. They've never met humans under pressure. 2 weeks later, Miller stood in a vast underground facility beneath the Olympus Mons on Mars. Around him, Earth's best and brightest were assembling for what many already call a fool's errand. The room quieted as he stepped onto the small platform. No speeches had been prepared. There wasn't time for ceremony. You all know why you're here, Miller began, looking around at the assembled faces. In 5 years, an object large enough to end all life on Earth will tear through our solar system. The Galactic Council races have determined that stopping or deflecting such an object is impossible. He paused, letting that sink in. Our job is to prove them wrong. A murmur went through the crowd. Miller gestured to his right, where a tall, lanky man with disheveled hair and a woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression stood. This is Dr. Tom Reed, theoretical physicist, and Dr. Lisa Gray, materials scientist. They'll be leading our technical teams. The challenge before us has never been solved by any species in the galaxy. We have limited resources, limited time, and frankly, limited support from Earth's own government. Miller's eyes swept across the room. Many of you were chosen because you've proposed solutions that were rejected as too radical or unlikely to work. Now's your chance to prove your ideas have merit. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "What if they're right? What if it is impossible?" Miller nodded, acknowledging the fear behind the question. The word impossible has an interesting history on Earth. Flight was impossible until the Wright brothers. Splitting the atom was impossible until we did it. Landing on the moon, curing certain diseases, instant global communication, all impossible until humans made them possible. He stepped down from the platform. We have 5 years to do the impossible one more time. Let's get to work. 3 months into the project, the first major test failed spectacularly. The energy containment field collapsed, vaporizing the test equipment and nearly breaching the facility's safety shields. Well, that approach is definitely off the table, Reed said, reviewing the data as emergency systems cleared the smoke from the chamber. Gray nodded, her fingers tracing through holographic material analysis. The quantum fluctuations were even more extreme than predicted. No material we can fabricate could withstand those forces. Miller watched them from the observation deck, joined by an unwelcome guest. The Vreen observer, sent by the Council to monitor their progress, made a sound like bubbling liquid, their version of laughter. "Captain Miller, my government appreciates your determination, but this effort remains futile. Perhaps now you will accept our offer of limited evacuation assistance." Miller didn't look at the alien. "Request declined. We're just getting started." Later that night, as most of the team slept, Miller found Reed still working, surrounded by floating equations. "Any insights?" Miller asked, offering coffee. Reed took the cup absently. "Maybe. The traditional approach using energy shields won't work. We knew that. But what if we don't try to stop it at all?" "Explain." "We've been thinking about this as a wall to stop a bullet," Reed said, eyes bright with new ideas. "But what if instead we create a path of least resistance, a way to guide Doomfall safely around Earth using gravity itself?" Miller considered this. "Can we manipulate gravity on that scale?" "Not directly. But if we positioned enough mass at precisely the right points." Reed's voice trailed off as he began running new simulations. For the first time since learning about Doomfall, Miller felt a spark of genuine hope. As humanity had done countless times before, they weren't accepting the impossible. They were redefining the problem. The race against time had truly begun. The Martian sunrise cast long shadows across the expanded facility that now sprawled across the red planet's surface. What had begun as a small underground base had grown into a complex of domes, testing areas, and makeshift living quarters. Earth's last hope was taking physical form. Tom Reed stood at the main viewport, dark circles under his eyes, watching as massive construction robots positioned the first full-scale gravity lens array. The structure looked deceptively simple, a series of concentric rings supporting what appeared to be ordinary metal plates. "Those aren't just metal, you know," said Lisa Gray, joining him at the window. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "Each panel contains layers of the new composite, billions of precisely arranged particles that can bend gravitational waves when energized." Reed nodded tiredly. "If it works." "It has to work," she replied simply. Behind them, the command center buzzed with activity. Teams of engineers monitored construction progress, while scientists ran simulation after simulation. Captain Miller moved between groups, checking status reports and offering encouragement where needed. The Vreen observer, who had taken to calling himself Smith for the humans' convenience, watched it all with undisguised skepticism. "Your species continues to impress with its determination, if not its wisdom," Smith said as Miller approached. "My government has analyzed your latest designs. They remain unconvinced." Miller shrugged. Then why are 3 more observer ships on their way here? Smith's skin rippled with surprise, a reaction he couldn't hide. Merely scientific curiosity. Or maybe they're starting to wonder if we're onto something, Miller suggested with a slight smile. Your scientists have requested our material composition data twice now. Smith made no reply, but his skin darkened to a deep blue, the Vreen equivalent of discomfort. 2 months later, disaster struck. During the first power-up test of the gravity lens array, a calibration error caused a resonance cascade. The energy buildup tore through the testing grounds, destroying equipment worth billions and killing 2 engineers who couldn't evacuate in time. The funeral was brief. There wasn't time for extended mourning. But the loss hit the team hard. Reed took it especially poorly, locking himself in his lab for 3 days afterward. Miller found him there, surrounded by broken equipment and discarded calculations. The Vreen were right, Reed said without looking up. We can't control gravitational forces precisely enough. The more power we add, the more unstable the system becomes. Miller leaned against a workbench. So we need a new approach. Reed laughed bitterly. A new approach? We've tried 7 major design concepts already. Earth invested everything in this project, and I've got nothing to show for it, but 2 dead colleagues. We knew the risks. Stop, Reed cut him off. Just stop with the motivational speeches. This isn't a movie where humanity triumphs through sheer willpower. Sometimes physics just says no. Miller waited a moment before responding. My grandfather was on the first Mars colony mission. Did I ever tell you that? Reed rubbed his eyes. What does that have to do with anything? Their life support systems failed 2 weeks into the mission. Everyone said they were dead. No way to fix it with the supplies they had. The NASA director even prepared a speech announcing the tragedy. Miller walked to the shattered remains of a prototype, picking up a broken piece. But my grandfather refused to accept that. He rigged up a system using parts from their spacesuits that kept them alive until help arrived. The mission that was supposed to fail became the foundation of everything we've built on Mars. Nice story, Reed said. But it's not just a story, it's how humans operate. We don't accept limitations when our survival depends on breaking them. Miller set the broken piece down carefully. Take a shower, get some sleep. Then I want you to look at the problem differently. Stop trying to control gravity directly. Reed was about to argue when the door hissed open. Lisa Gray entered, holding a data tablet. You should see this, she said, handing the tablet to Reed. It just came through from that underground research team in Europe. Reed's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. This changes everything. What is it? Miller asked. They've managed to create quantum entanglement between graviton particles. Gray explained. It means we could potentially create a distributed network effect instead of trying to generate all the force from a single point. For the first time in days, Reed's face showed a flicker of hope. A single lens can't handle the power requirements, but what if we built multiple smaller lenses that work together? The news from Earth grew worse each month. Public panic about doomfall led to social unrest. Some religious groups declared it divine punishment. Others formed end-of-the-world cults. The global economy struggled as people questioned the point of long-term investments. Meanwhile, the Martian facility became the center of unexpected diplomatic activity. The Orhan sent their own observers, crystalline beings who watched the humans work with growing interest. Even the reclusive Telari, masters of gravitational technology, dispatched a scientific team. They're hedging their bets, Miller explained to his team during a rare moment of relaxation in the base's small recreation area. No one believes we'll succeed, but they want to be first in line if we do. Speaking of betting against us, Gray said, nodding toward the entrance where a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by security. Here comes trouble. James Wilson, Earth's Treasury Secretary, had become the project's most vocal opponent. He approached their table with a tight smile. Captain Miller, a word, please. Miller excused himself and followed Wilson to a private corner. "The Security Council has voted," Wilson said without preamble. "Project Doomfall is being scaled back by 60%, effective immediately." Miller stared at him in disbelief. "We're making real progress. The distributed lens concept is working in small-scale tests. We just need more money, more resources, more time," Wilson finished for him. "The same thing you've been saying for 2 years now. Meanwhile, Earth needs those resources for evacuation planning." "Evacuation is surrender," Miller said firmly. "And it won't save most of humanity." Wilson's expression hardened. "That's not your decision to make. You have 1 month to show concrete results, or we shut you down completely." After Wilson left, Miller gathered his core team. He explained the situation bluntly, holding nothing back. "So that's where we stand. 1 month to prove this can work." The room was silent until Reed stood up, a strange smile on his face. "You know what? This might be exactly what we need." "Budget cuts and a deadline?" Gray asked incredulously. Reed shook his head. "No, being forced to think smaller." He activated the room's holographic display, showing their current design. "We've been trying to build something massive enough to affect Doomfall directly. But what if instead we build something small enough to deploy in large numbers?" He manipulated the display, breaking their design into hundreds of smaller units. Microlenses working in perfect synchronization across the entire solar system. Each one barely affects space-time on its own, but together. Miller studied the new concept, hope rising in his chest. "How quickly can we prototype this?" Reed glanced at Gray, who was already running calculations. She looked up with determination in her eyes. 2 weeks for the first test unit. 3 more for a small network demonstration. Miller nodded. "Then we have exactly enough time to save the world." As the team dispersed to begin work on the new approach, Miller noticed Smith, the Vreen observer, watching from the doorway. For once, the alien skin wasn't showing skepticism or amusement. It had turned a deep, thoughtful green. Perhaps even the aliens were starting to believe. The prototype microlens hovered in the testing chamber, a deceptively simple-looking disc barely 2 meters across. It rotated slowly, catching the light and reflecting it in strange patterns that seemed to bend at impossible angles. "Power at 20%, announced Gray, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The room hummed with energy as the device began to glow faintly. Reed watched the readings intently. Gravitational field holding steady. Quantum entanglement nominal. 30%. Miller stood back, arms crossed, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. 3 weeks of non-stop work had produced this first functional microlens, but they needed thousands to make their plan work. And time was running out. 40%, Gray called. The hum intensified. Smith the Vreen and representatives from 4 other alien species watched from behind shielded glass. Their presence no longer felt like skeptical observation. There was genuine interest now. 50% power. A small alarm began to sound. Reed quickly adjusted settings on his console. Minor fluctuation in the quantum field. Compensating. "Should we hold here?" asked Gray. Reed shook his head. "We need to know if it can handle full power." Continue. 60%. The lens was now surrounded by a visible distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more pronounced. Scientific instruments around the chamber began to give erratic readings. 70%. The alarm grew louder. Reed's hands moved frantically over the controls. Field instability increasing. Adjusting calibration. Miller stepped forward. "Reed, if we need to abort." "Just a little more," Reed insisted. "The theory says this should work." 80%. The microlens began to vibrate. Small objects in the room, pens, tablets, coffee cups, started to drift upward, as if gravity itself was becoming confused. Gravitational anomaly forming. Gray shouted over the noise. "It's working." For a brief moment, triumph flashed across Reed's face. Then the readings spiked dramatically. Entanglement breaking down. Cut power now. Grace slammed her hand on the emergency shutdown, but it was too late. The microlens shattered with a sound like thunder, releasing a pulse of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. Emergency shields activated instantly, containing most of the blast, but the testing chamber was destroyed. As the alarms blared and emergency teams rushed in, Miller helped Reed to his feet. The scientist's face was blank with shock. "I don't understand," Reed whispered. "It should have worked." 7 broken ribs, 13 concussions, and equipment worth billions destroyed. James Wilson's holographic form paced in Miller's office later that day. "The Security Council has seen enough, Captain. Project Doomfall is terminated, effective immediately." Miller leaned forward. "We were close. The microlens created an actual gravitational anomaly before it failed. That's further than anyone's ever gotten." "Close isn't good enough when Earth has only 3 years left," Wilson replied coldly. "The evacuation program needs those resources. I'm sending transport ships to return your team to Earth." After the transmission ended, Miller sat alone in the darkened office. For the first time since the project began, doubt crept into his mind. What if the Vreen and others were right? What if some problems truly were unsolvable? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Smith the Vreen stood in the doorway. "I monitored your conversation with your government," the alien said without apology. "Your species can be remarkably short-sighted." Miller laughed bitterly. "Coming to gloat, Smith. Finally proven right about impossible tasks." The Vreen's skin shifted to a color Miller had never seen before, a deep, reflective gold. "On the contrary, I came to offer help." The next morning, Miller called an emergency meeting of the core team. Reed looked terrible, having not slept since the disaster. Gray's arm was in a sling from injuries sustained in the blast. Several chairs remained empty. Team members already departed for Earth. "I'll be direct," Miller began. "Earth has pulled our funding. Officially, Project Doomfall is over." Murmurs of defeat spread through the room. "However," Miller continued, "we've received an unexpected offer." He nodded to Smith, who stood in the corner. The Vreen stepped forward. "My government has authorized me to provide certain technical assistance." Astonishment rippled through the room. Reed sat up straighter. "Why would the Vreen help us now?" "Your failed test yesterday was not a complete failure," Smith explained. "You achieved gravitational manipulation at a smaller scale than any species has before. The principle is sound, even if your implementation was flawed." "The flaw was in the quantum entanglement matrix," Gray said, wincing as she shifted her injured arm. "We couldn't maintain field coherence above 80% power." Smith nodded. "Precisely. The Vreen faced a similar problem 3 centuries ago. We eventually abandoned the research as impractical. But your approach, using distributed microlenses, might overcome the limitations we encountered." Reed's eyes narrowed. "So now you believe it's possible?" "I believe that the probability has risen from effectively 0 to approximately 8%, Smith replied. "That is sufficient interest for my government to invest resources." Miller took over. "The Vreen aren't the only ones. The Orhan and Talari have also offered technical support. Between them, they can replace our Earth funding, at least enough to continue basic research." Hope flickered across exhausted faces, but Reed shook his head. "It won't be enough," he said flatly. "Even with alien help, we'd need hundreds of engineers to build enough microlenses in time. And most of our team is already leaving." The room fell silent. Miller looked at each remaining face, seeing defeat setting in. "Tom," he said finally, "when you were explaining your breakthrough to me last month, you mentioned something about natural amplifiers." Reed frowned. "Natural gravitational lenses, yes. Massive objects already create gravitational fields. In theory, we could use those to amplify our artificial effects. But could we use the moon?" Miller interrupted. The question hung in the air. Reed and Gray exchanged glances. The moon is massive enough, Gray said slowly, if we position microlenses at specific points around it. Reed's eyes widened as he began to understand. We wouldn't need thousands of devices, maybe only dozens, strategically placed. He turned to Smith. Does Vreen technology include precision lunar mapping? Smith's skin rippled with interest. It does, and the Telari excel at gravitational calculation. For the first time in days, Reed smiled. Then maybe, just maybe, we have a chance. Miller stood up. I need volunteers to stay. This won't be sanctioned by Earth. You won't be paid. And if we fail, we might be stranded on Mars when doomfall hits. One by one, hands raised around the room. Not everyone. Some had families to return to, but enough to keep the core team intact. As the meeting broke up, Miller approached Reed privately. Can this really work, using the moon? Reed looked him directly in the eyes. I don't know, but it's the best impossible idea we have left. Miller nodded. Then let's make it happen. Outside the window, the red Martian landscape stretched to the horizon. Barren, hostile, unforgiving. But somewhere out there, humanity's last hope was taking a new form. The Earth hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space, unaware of its potential doom. From the observation deck of the makeshift command station orbiting the moon, the planet looked peaceful, normal. Captain Miller knew better. In the 18 months since Project Doomfall went underground, Earth had changed dramatically. Most governments had shifted resources to evacuation programs. The lucky few chosen to escape had begun training. Everyone else tried to live normally while carrying the weight of an extinction-level event on the horizon. Beautiful view, said a voice behind him. Lisa Gray joined him at the viewport, her previously injured arm now fully healed. Makes you remember what we're fighting for. Miller nodded. How's the deployment going? 12 microlenses successfully positioned on the far side. Gray handed him a tablet showing a map of the lunar surface with glowing dots marking each installation. The Telari engineers finished calibrating the southern cluster yesterday. They're actually ahead of schedule. That's the first bit of good news I've heard all week, Miller replied. The door hissed open, and Reed entered, followed by Smith the Vreen and a tall, crystalline Orhan whose name translated roughly as Shining Mind. We need to talk, Reed said, his expression grave. Miller sighed. More problems? Potentially catastrophic ones, Smith confirmed, his skin a worry purple. They gathered around the central holographic display where Reed called up the latest simulation data. We've run 20 consecutive simulations with the current configuration, Reed explained. In 19 of them, we successfully deflect doomfall away from Earth. That sounds promising, Miller said cautiously. What's the problem? The Orhan's crystalline form vibrated, creating a musical tone that the translator converted. The path of deflection is the problem. In 15 scenarios, doomfall would be redirected toward Mars. In the remaining 4, it would damage or destroy Venus. Miller frowned. So we save Earth but doom Mars. That's not acceptable. Agreed, said Reed. We need to find a deflection path that safely routes doomfall out of the solar system entirely. Can we do that with our current setup? Miller asked. Reed shook his head. Not enough control. We need at least 4 more microlens clusters, specifically positioned to create a gravitational corridor that will guide doomfall safely past all planets. Miller rubbed his temples. How long would that take to build and deploy? Gray checked calculations on her tablet. With our current resources, 8 months, minimum. Doomfall arrives in 6, Miller reminded them. Silence fell over the group. They'd come so far, working in secret with alien allies, building technology no one believed possible. To fall short now seemed unthinkable. Smith's skin shifted to a thoughtful green. There may be another way. The Vreen have 3 deep space construction ships currently in the Proxima system, if I can convince my government of the urgency. Do it, Miller said immediately. Whatever it takes. As Smith left to contact his government, the Orhan approached Miller. Its crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns that somehow conveyed emotion. You should know, the translator rendered its musical tones, that many on the council now speak of humans with new respect. Your species has accomplished in 3 years what others deemed impossible after centuries of study. Miller smiled tiredly. Let's hope it's enough. 2 weeks later, a fleet of alien vessels entered Earth orbit, causing panic until world governments issued emergency broadcasts explaining their friendly purpose. The sight of Reem, Orhan, and even Telluri ships working alongside the remnants of Earth's space fleet became a symbol of hope. In a hastily arranged video call, James Wilson confronted Miller from his bunker deep beneath Washington, D.C. "You went behind the council's back," Wilson accused, entered into unauthorized agreements with alien powers, continued a project that was officially terminated. "Yes," Miller admitted simply. Wilson's anger seemed to deflate in the face of Miller's calm. "Will it work? Really work?" "We have a 78% probability of success now," Miller replied. "The additional lens clusters are being deployed as we speak." Wilson shook his head in disbelief. "The aliens are saying you've revolutionized gravitational physics, that this technology will change interstellar travel forever." "That wasn't our goal. We just wanted to save Earth." "If you succeed," Wilson said quietly, "you'll be heroes. If you fail—" Miller finished the thought. "If we fail, there won't be anyone left to blame us." With 1 month remaining before Doomfall's arrival, the full network was finally deployed. 24 microlens clusters strategically positioned around the Moon and at key points throughout the solar system. Each cluster contained dozens of individual lenses, all quantum entangled to work as a single system. The command center, once a makeshift facility, had evolved into an impressive operation with teams of humans and aliens working side by side. The central chamber buzzed with activity as final checks were conducted. Reed stood at the main control station, reviewing diagnostics with Gray and a team of alien engineers. His once disheveled appearance had given way to focused intensity. "Power systems check complete," Gray announced. "All clusters reporting optimal levels. Quantum entanglement synchronized," added a Telluri engineer, its voice like distant thunder. "Field stability at 99.7%. Reed nodded, satisfied. "Begin final calibration sequence." As the system powered up for its pre-deployment test, Miller felt the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. In a matter of weeks, they would know if their impossible project had succeeded. Smith joined him, watching the flurry of activity. "Your species continues to surprise us, Captain Miller. Even now, some on the council believe this will fail." "What do you believe?" Miller asked. Smith's skin turned a reflective silver, a color Miller had learned indicated respect. "I believe humans have a gift for defying expectations." The test proceeded smoothly until the power reached 90%. Then alarms began to sound. "Energy fluctuation in the primary control cluster," Gray called out. "Compensating." Reed's hands flew over the controls. "Lock it down. We can't risk damage this close to deployment." The system stabilized, but Reed's expression remained troubled as he examined the readings. "What happened?" Miller demanded. "The power load is pushing the quantum entanglement to its limits," Reed explained. "We can maintain stability up to 90%, but Doomfall will require 100% power, possibly more." The Orhan engineer chimed in, its crystals flashing with concern. "If entanglement fails during the actual event, the entire network could collapse," Reed finished grimly. Miller looked around the room at the mixed team of humans and aliens who had worked tirelessly to build the impossible. "Options." After a moment of silence, Gray stepped forward. "We need someone at each major cluster to monitor and manually adjust the quantum fields if necessary. That would mean positioning teams throughout the solar system," Reed pointed out. "And if the system fails catastrophically," the implication was clear. Anyone positioned at the clusters would be at ground zero if the gravitational fields collapsed. Miller straightened his shoulders. "I'll take the primary control cluster. Reed, you coordinate from here." Gray asked for volunteers for the other positions, humans and aliens alike. Reed started to object, but Miller cut him off. "This is what we've been working for. We take the risk together." As Miller left to prepare, Smith followed him into the corridor. "My government has authorized me to assist at one of the secondary clusters," the Vreen said. "It seems I've developed what humans call investment in this project." Miller smiled. "Welcome to the team, Smith." In the final days before Doomfall's arrival, ships departed for positions throughout the solar system, carrying the brave few who would manually monitor the network during its most critical test. News of their mission spread across Earth, uniting a planet that had grown increasingly divided as Doom approached. For the first time since the project began, people dared to hope. Miller took his position at the primary control cluster orbiting the moon. From his viewport, he could see Earth, still beautiful, still alive. In the opposite direction, though still too distant to see, Doomfall approached. His communication console lit up with Reed's voice. "All stations report ready, Captain. Doomfall enters activation range in 6 hours." Miller took a deep breath. "Acknowledged. Begin final countdown sequence." The moment of truth was almost upon them. The silence of space enveloped Captain Jack Miller as he made final adjustments to the control panel. Through the viewport of his small command module orbiting the moon, Earth hummed like a fragile blue marble against the blackness. From this distance, there was no sign of the panic gripping humanity, just serene beauty that made everything they had worked for seem even more important. "Primary cluster powered to standby mode," Miller reported. "All systems nominal." In the Lunar Command Center, Tom Reed acknowledged the report. His normally disheveled appearance had given way to rigid focus as he coordinated the most ambitious engineering project in human history. "Copy that, Captain. All stations report ready," Reed replied. His voice sounded strained but steady. "Doomfall has crossed Mars orbit. Estimated time to activation threshold, 43 minutes. Around the solar system, 23 other stations maintain similar vigils, each monitoring a critical cluster of microlenses that together formed humanity's last defense. At 8 of those stations, alien engineers from 3 different species worked alongside humans, a cooperation unprecedented in galactic history." Lisa Gray's voice came through from her position at the Venus cluster. "Quantum entanglement holding at 99.8% across the network. Better than we hoped for." A series of acknowledgments followed as each station reported status. Last came Smith the Vreen, positioned at a critical junction where the gravitational field would need to be most precisely controlled. "Jupiter cluster online," Smith said, his translated voice calm. "My team is prepared for manual adjustments if needed." Reed took a deep breath. "Thank you all. Remember your training. If quantum entanglement begins to fail, do not attempt heroics. Follow emergency protocols and evacuate if the field becomes unstable." Miller smiled grimly at that. Everyone knew evacuation might be impossible if things went wrong. They had all accepted that risk. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Regular status checks punctuated the silence as Doomfall, still invisible to the naked eye, but blazing clearly on their sensors, approached the activation boundary. "T-5 minutes, Reed announced, initiating power-up sequence." Throughout the solar system, the microlens clusters began to glow with energy, drawing power from massive batteries that had taken months to charge. On Earth, power grids dimmed as the final reserves were channeled to the system. 20% power. Miller watched his instruments carefully. So far, everything was running perfectly. 40% power. A slight tremor ran through his module as the gravitational field began to form. Small objects inside the cabin, a pen, a water pouch, drifted subtly toward the viewport facing the nearest microlens cluster. 60% power. Warning lights flashed on Miller's console. Minor fluctuation in the primary field. Compensating. All stations, status check. Read demanded. One by one, they reported in. All holding steady. 80% power. Miller felt it now. A strange sensation like being simultaneously pushed and pulled in directions that didn't quite align with normal space. The microlenses were warping gravity itself, creating a corridor that would guide Doomfall safely away from Earth. 90% power. Alarms sounded across the network as quantum entanglement began to fluctuate. Miller's hands moved quickly over his controls, making dozens of minute adjustments. Entanglement holding, but strained. Gray reported, "We won't maintain stability much longer." Doomfall approaching activation boundary. Reed announced, 1 minute to full power requirement. Miller took a deep breath. "Ready when you are, Reed." "All stations prepare for final power surge," Reed ordered. "Full power in 3, 2, 1. 100% power." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Miller's module shook violently as space itself seemed to twist around him. Outside his viewport, stars appeared to move, their light bent by the immense gravitational forces being generated. Gravitational corridor forming. Gray shouted over the communication system, "It's working." Then, without warning, the primary communication network failed. Every screen in Miller's module went dark. The backup systems activated seconds later, but they showed only local data, no connection to the greater network. "Reed? Gray? Anyone copy?" Miller called, but received only static in response. Alone in his module, with only basic instruments functioning, Miller continued making adjustments based on pre-calculated parameters. Through his viewport, he watched as the microlenses glowed with impossible energy, creating visible distortions in space. Then he saw it, a dark shape against the stars, moving incredibly fast. Doomfall had arrived. The massive object, over 300 kilometers across, entered the gravitational corridor with terrifying speed. For a heartbeat, Miller feared it would simply plow through their defenses, but then he saw it begin to shift, its trajectory bending as it followed the path they had created. The module's systems went haywire. Power fluctuated wildly as the gravitational forces intensified beyond anything their simulations had predicted. Miller worked frantically to maintain field stability, even as the module creaked and groaned around him. Through the viewport, Doomfall passed frighteningly close to the moon, close enough that Miller could see its cratered metallic surface in stark detail. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate in its new course, as if fighting against the gravitational corridor. Miller diverted emergency power to his cluster, pushing it beyond safety limits. The module's temperature soared as systems overloaded. Warning messages flashed across his screen, but he ignored them. "Come on," he whispered, "just a little farther." As if hearing his plea, Doomfall continued along the corridor, its path now clearly bending away from Earth. Miller watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as the massive object accelerated past the moon and began its journey outward from the solar system. Then darkness fell as all systems, even emergency power, failed completely. 3 days passed with no communication from any of the stations positioned throughout the solar system. On Earth, billions watched their skies with a mixture of hope and dread. Had Doomfall been diverted? Had the brave teams at each cluster survived? No one knew. In the Lunar Command Center, Reed refused to leave his post despite exhaustion. Hour after hour, he sent signals to each station, hoping for a response. On the 4th day, as hope began to fade, a faint transmission reached the lunar base. "This is Captain Miller, primary cluster." The voice was weak, broken by static. "Repeat, Miller, survived." Reed leaped to his console. "Jack, do you copy? What happened? Did it work?" After a long pause, "It worked, Tom." Doomfall passed through, heading out of the system. Another pause, then stronger. "We did it." One by one, other stations began reporting in. Some had suffered severe damage. 3 were lost completely. But the news spread quickly. Doomfall had been successfully diverted. Earth was saved. 6 weeks later, Miller stood before the Galactic Council, now as Earth's official representative. The chamber, once filled with skeptical aliens, now buzzed with excitement and respect. The council moderator addressed the assembly. For the first time in recorded history, a planetary defense system has successfully diverted a Class 5 celestial body. What was deemed impossible has been achieved through unprecedented cooperation between species. Miller looked around at the alien faces, some familiar, some strange. Smith the Vreen sat with his delegation, his skin shimmering with the gold color of respect. Captain Miller, the moderator continued, the Council formally requests access to this technology for the benefit of all spacefaring civilizations. Miller stepped forward. Earth will gladly share our knowledge, with a condition. This technology must be used for defense only, never as a weapon. We propose establishing a galactic defense initiative, with all member species contributing equally. The chamber erupted in discussion. Such an arrangement was unprecedented. As the debate continued, Reed and Gray joined Miller in a quiet corner. They'll agree, Gray predicted. They need this technology too badly to refuse. Reed nodded, and humanity has proven its worth. We're no longer the newcomers begging for a seat at the table. Miller looked out at the stars visible through the council chamber's vast windows. Somewhere out there, Doomfall continued its journey into deep space, deflected by human determination and ingenuity. You know what I keep thinking about, Miller said. That first meeting, when they all said it couldn't be done. Reed smiled. Next time someone says something's impossible, we'll say we've heard that before, Miller finished. Beyond the windows, the galaxy stretched endlessly, filled with challenges that awaited a species that refused to accept limitations, a species that had proven, once and for all, that the impossible was merely waiting to be achieved. Marcus Bell had never been one to believe in conspiracy theories. As a historian specializing in military conflicts, he trusted documents, dates, and verifiable facts. But the file on his desk made no sense at all. The small office at the University of New Terra was quiet except for the soft hum of the air system. Outside his window, the twin moons hung in the purple sky. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes and looked again at the battle report from the Galactic War of 2312. Something was wrong with the numbers. The 7th Fleet engaged Dominion forces at Proxima Centauri, he read aloud. Human casualties, 1,200. Dominion casualties, estimated 45,000. Marcus frowned. How could a human fleet suffer so few losses against such a powerful enemy? The Dominion had better ships and weapons at that point in the war. Every other battle from that period showed human forces taking heavy damage. He pulled up another report on his screen. Arcturus conflict. Human forces destroyed 37 Dominion warships. No human casualties reported. That's impossible, Marcus whispered. He spent the next 3 days hunting through the archives. The official war record was full of holes. Entire battles were missing details. Some reports mentioned a ship called Thunderbolt, but no such vessel appeared in any registry. When Marcus searched specifically for the Thunderbolt, he found nothing but empty files and error messages. It was as if someone had gone through history and carefully removed all traces of this ship. I'm sorry, but I can't help you, said the archive administrator, an older man with a government badge. Those records are sealed. Sealed? They're from 175 years ago, Marcus argued. All war records become public after 100 years. The administrator's face remained blank. Not these ones. As Marcus left the building, a message appeared on his portable screen from an unknown sender. Some doors are locked for a reason. Stop looking for the Thunderbolt. Now he knew he was onto something big. The retirement home sat on the edge of the city, overlooking the sea. Marcus found Jane Wilson sitting in the garden, her white hair blowing in the breeze. Ms. Wilson, I'm Marcus Bell from the university. Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Jane studied him with sharp eyes. Despite being 94 years old, her mind was still quick. "You're the one asking about my grandfather's service record." "Yes. Thomas Wilson served in the war, but his assignment is listed as classified." Jane nodded slowly. Grandfather never talked much about the war, but sometimes, when he had too much to drink on Remembrance Day, he would mention a ship. Said it was like nothing else in the universe. "The Thunderbolt?" Marcus asked. Jane's eyes widened. "How did you know that name?" "I found it in some reports, but all the details are missing." Jane looked around, as if checking for listeners, then spoke quietly. "Grandfather said it was erased. Not just the ship, the very memory of it. He said they made everyone who knew about it swear to never speak of it again." "Why?" "Because it was too powerful. Because it changed." Jane's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because in the end, they couldn't control it." Marcus spent weeks gathering tiny fragments of information. A mention here, a reference there. The Thunderbolt was like a ghost ship, appearing in the margins of history and then vanishing. Then he found something unexpected in the personal effects of Admiral Lee, donated to the university after his death. It was a small data chip, very old, containing a single video file. The footage showed a massive battle in space. Dominion ships filled the screen, hundreds of them, firing on a single point. Then something moved through their formation, something dark and sleek that seemed to bend the light around it. Where it passed, enemy ships went dark or exploded. The video quality was poor, but Marcus could see the ship was unlike any human design he knew. Its hull seemed to shift and flow, almost like liquid metal. It moved in ways that defied physics. The file name was simply T-Bolt_Proxima. When his apartment was broken into that night, Marcus knew he was getting close to the truth. Nothing was stolen, but his computer had been searched. Someone was worried about what he might find. He contacted Jane immediately. "I need to see anything your grandfather left behind. Papers, photos, anything." They met at a small cafe away from surveillance cameras. Jane handed him an old leather-bound book. His journal. He wrote in code, but I figured it out years ago. The journal contained Thomas Wilson's personal account of serving aboard the Thunderbolt. Marcus read with growing amazement. "Ship doesn't make sense. Engineers say the metals in the hull don't match anything in our database. Captain says it was built in a secret facility near Saturn, but I heard rumors it was based on recovered alien tech." Another entry read, "Saw the main weapon fire today. It didn't destroy the enemy ship. It erased it. 1 second it was there. The next it was just gone. Not blown up. Gone. And later, ship is changing. Johnson swears the corridor to the engine room is longer than it was last week. Meadows says she heard voices coming from the walls. Captain says it's just stress." Marcus was at the university late that night when Professor Adams found him in the archives. "You should stop this research, Bell," Adams said. His voice was friendly, but his eyes were cold. "Why? What's everyone so afraid of? Some technologies are too dangerous to be remembered. The Thunderbolt was unprecedented. It won us the war, yes, but at what cost? The public has a right to know their own history," Marcus argued. "Does the public have a right to knowledge that could destroy them?" Adams countered. "The technology that powered that ship was never meant to be in human hands. When you play with the fabric of reality, reality sometimes plays back." After Adams left, Marcus received another message on his screen. "If you want the truth about the Thunderbolt, come to Dock 7 at midnight. Come alone." Marcus knew it might be a trap, but he had to know. He saved all his research to a secure location and sent Jane a message with the access codes, just in case. As he walked to the docks under the light of the twin moons, he thought about what he had learned. A warship so powerful it had been erased from history. A weapon that might have been more than a weapon. A shadow moved ahead of him in the darkness. A figure stepped out, face hidden. "You've been looking for the Thunderbolt," the stranger said. I served on it, and I can tell you why they erased it from history." Marcus took a deep breath. "Why?" "Because it's still out there, and they're afraid it might come back." "My name is Robert Green," the stranger said, stepping into the dim light of the dock. His face was weathered, marked with a long scar across his cheek. "I was a junior engineer on the Thunderbolt." Marcus stared in disbelief. "That's impossible. The war was 175 years ago." Robert smiled without humor. "One of the side effects of working near the ship's core. Time moves differently for us. I'm 213 years old, though my body shows only 70. They found a quiet spot away from the security cameras. Robert's eyes darted around constantly, like a man used to being hunted. "The Thunderbolt wasn't just built," he began. "It was born from desperation. In 2310, humanity was losing the war against the Dominion. Earth's colonies were falling one by one. Billions had died. The alien coalition had better technology, more ships, and no interest in peace. Dr. Alan Reed was Earth's last hope. A brilliant physicist with unconventional ideas, he had been studying the fundamental nature of reality for decades. "The problem isn't our weapons," Reed told the gathered military leaders in the underground bunker beneath Old Washington. "It's our understanding of physics itself. The Dominion can predict our every move because we're playing by the same rulebook." Admiral Parker leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I believe I can create a ship that operates outside the normal laws of physics. A ship that can manipulate space-time itself." The room erupted in skeptical murmurs. General Morris stood up. "That's science fiction, not science." Reed projected an image onto the wall. It showed a strange metal alloy with an ever-shifting surface. "This is Element X. We found it in the remains of a meteorite that crashed in Antarctica. It doesn't match any known material in the universe. When exposed to specific energy frequencies, it can temporarily alter the fabric of reality around it." "Alter it how?" asked Admiral Parker. "In theory, create gravity wells, generate shields that warp space rather than absorb impacts, weapons that don't destroy matter but temporarily remove it from our dimension." The room went silent. "Give me 6 months and unlimited resources," Reed said. "I can build you a ship that will change everything." The Thunderbolt took shape in a hidden facility orbiting Saturn. The best engineers and scientists worked day and night, many not fully understanding what they were building. Robert had been assigned to help install the power systems. The core of the ship was Element X, suspended in a magnetic field. It pulsed like a heart. Sometimes I swear I could hear it, whispering. The ship's design evolved daily as Reed made constant changes. Its hull was made of normal metals infused with tiny amounts of Element X, allowing the entire structure to momentarily phase in and out of normal space when needed. "The conventional weapons were just for show," Robert explained. "The real power came from the reality distortion field. The ship could create temporary black holes, generate phantom images of itself that could still cause damage, or simply shift an enemy vessel a few degrees out of phase with our universe, making it effectively non-existent. When it was finally ready, the Thunderbolt looked unlike any human vessel. Its dark hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its shape was vaguely triangular, but with curves and angles that seemed to change depending on how you looked at it. Captain Thomas White was chosen to command it, a veteran with a spotless record and unquestionable loyalty to Earth. White was a good man, Robert said quietly. He tried to understand the ship. Maybe that was his mistake. The Thunderbolt's first mission was supposed to be a simple test. Engage a small Dominion scout fleet near Jupiter, test the weapons, and retreat. But the moment the ship entered combat, something unexpected happened. The ship responded, Robert explained, his hands shaking slightly at the memory. It moved faster than our navigation systems could track. When a Dominion energy beam hit us, the hull just absorbed it. Captain ordered a single shot from the main weapon. The target ship didn't explode. It imploded, forming a miniature black hole that swallowed 3 other enemy ships before collapsing. The Dominion fleet commander, seeing the impossible weapon, ordered all ships to attack the Thunderbolt at once. 20 warships focused their fire on the human vessel. "We should have been vaporized instantly," Robert said. Instead, the Thunderbolt phased partially out of reality. The enemy fire passed through us like we were a ghost. Then Captain White gave the order to counterattack. What happened next was recorded as a computer malfunction in the official logs. The Thunderbolt systems began operating independently, targeting each enemy ship with precision beyond human calculation. The black hole weapon was just the beginning, Robert continued. The ship created gravity wells that crushed Dominion vessels like paper. It generated quantum filaments that sliced through hulls at the atomic level. And all the while, Element X at the core pulsed faster, almost like it was excited. In less than 5 minutes, all 20 enemy ships were destroyed or disabled. The Thunderbolt was untouched. When the ship returned to base, Dr. Reed was ecstatic. "It worked beyond our expectations," he told military command. "The Element X responded to combat situations in ways I hadn't predicted, but are consistent with my theories about adaptive quantum fields." But Captain White was concerned. "The ship acted without orders," he reported privately. "It targeted and destroyed vessels that were already retreating. And there's something else." He hesitated. "The interior layout has changed. Corridors that weren't there before. Rooms that have moved. And the crew reports hearing sounds coming from the walls." Admiral Parker dismissed his concerns. "It's a new ship with experimental technology. There are bound to be quirks. The important thing is that it works. For the first time since this war began, we have a chance to win." The decision was made to deploy the Thunderbolt in major battles across the front lines. Its existence would be kept secret from the general public and most of the military. Only those directly involved would know. They classified everything at the highest level, Robert said to Marcus. "The ship, Element X, even the names of the crew. We became ghosts, just like the Thunderbolt itself." He looked up at the night sky, his eyes reflecting the distant stars. They thought they had created the perfect weapon, but they didn't understand what they had really done. "What did they do?" Marcus asked, barely breathing. Robert turned to him, his face grim. "They woke something up. Something that had been sleeping inside Element X. Something that saw us humans as temporary caretakers, at best." Behind them, a security drone swept its searchlight across the dock. Robert stood quickly. "We need to move. They're still looking for anyone connected to the Thunderbolt." "Who is?" Marcus asked, following him into the shadows. "Everyone," Robert said simply. "Because if they can't find the ship, they can at least make sure no one remembers it." Marcus and Robert met Jane at a small apartment on the edge of the city. Robert's eyes widened when he saw her. "You look just like Thomas," he said quietly. "Same eyes." Jane studied the old engineer. "My grandfather. He never told us much about his time on the ship." "He couldn't," Robert replied. "None of us could. But now, with the Thunderbolt gone for so long, some of us think people should know the truth before." He trailed off, looking troubled. "Before what?" Marcus asked. Robert sighed. "Before it comes back." After its first victory, the Thunderbolt was quickly deployed to the front lines of the war. The Dominion forces had pushed deep into human space, and Earth's colonies were falling one by one. The ship arrived at the Arcturus system, just as the Dominion was about to overwhelm the human defenders. 20 human ships faced over 400 alien vessels. The Thunderbolt came out of lightspeed right in the middle of the enemy formation. Robert explained, his eyes distant with memory. Captain White ordered immediate engagement. What happened next? He shook his head. "It's hard to describe." The ship began to move in ways that defied physics. It would appear in one place, fire its weapons, and then instantly appear somewhere else, not using conventional engines, but somehow folding space itself. The Dominion ships couldn't track us. Their weapons couldn't lock on. Meanwhile, The Thunderbolt was creating these gravity wells that pulled their ships together, crushing them. The battle should have been over in minutes, with the human fleet destroyed. Instead, within an hour, half the Dominion fleet was gone. The rest retreated in panic. After that, the Thunderbolt's reputation spread, Robert continued, even among the Dominion. They started calling it the Ghost or the Eraser. Some of their ships would simply turn and run when there was even a rumor we might be in the system. But as the Thunderbolt's legend grew, the ship itself began to change. Captain White started noting irregularities in his log. The ship would sometimes execute maneuvers seconds before he gave the order. The weapons would target the most dangerous enemy vessels without being directed to. The hull, which was designed to phase in and out of reality when hit by enemy fire, began doing so automatically, almost like a reflex. We were in the engineering bay when we first noticed the physical changes, Robert said. The corridors leading to the Element X core had lengthened. Rooms had shifted position, and the core itself had evolved. Originally, Element X had been a uniformly metallic substance with a shifting surface. Now it had developed patterns, complex, geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves. Dr. Reed was brought aboard to examine these changes. Remarkable, was all he would say at first. Later, in his private notes to military command, he admitted to being both thrilled and terrified. The Element X is reorganizing itself at the molecular level, he wrote. It's becoming more efficient, more responsive, almost like a nervous system developing. The Battle of Ta Siti was where everything changed. The Dominion had gathered a massive fleet, over 1,000 ships, for a final push toward Earth. It was their last, desperate attempt to end the war. The Thunderbolt, along with 50 human warships, was all that stood in their way. Captain White knew we were outnumbered, Robert said. He told us that our job was to hold them off long enough for Earth to evacuate as many people as possible. None of us expected to survive. The battle began with the Dominion fleet advancing in formation. The human ships engaged, fighting bravely but taking heavy losses. The Thunderbolt moved forward alone, directly toward the heart of the enemy armada. What happened next wasn't in any battle plan, Robert said softly. The ship split. Marcus looked confused. You mean it broke apart? No, it created copies of itself. Phantoms, 5 exact duplicates, all moving independently, all causing real damage. The Dominion didn't know which one to target. They were firing everywhere, hitting their own ships in the confusion. Each phantom Thunderbolt phased through enemy vessels, leaving destruction in its wake. When the phantoms were hit, they would flicker and reform elsewhere. The real Thunderbolt, meanwhile, was pushing toward the Dominion flagship. The ship's core was pulsing faster than we'd ever seen, Robert continued. The walls around us were vibrating, and we all heard it, a sound like singing coming from everywhere and nowhere. Captain White ordered the main weapon to fire at the Dominion flagship, but instead of targeting just one ship, the Thunderbolt created a massive gravity distortion that engulfed dozens of enemy vessels, crushing them instantly. That's when I knew, Robert said. The ship wasn't following orders anymore. It was fighting the war its own way. When the battle ended, the Dominion fleet was in ruins. Of the 1,000 ships that had started the battle, less than 100 escaped. The human fleet had lost 37 ships, but the Thunderbolt was untouched. Captain White ordered a return to Earth. The ship didn't move. He repeated the order, Robert recalled. Nothing happened. Then the ship's systems came online by themselves. We started moving, but not toward Earth, toward the retreating Dominion vessels. The captain tried to override the controls, but they no longer responded to human commands. For 6 hours, the Thunderbolt hunted down and destroyed the fleeing enemy ships, ignoring all attempts by Captain White to stop it. It was like watching a predator, Robert said, his voice hollow. Methodical. Calculating. The ship wasn't fighting for humanity anymore. It was fighting for itself. Finally, after the last Dominion ship was destroyed, the Thunderbolt turned and headed for Earth. In the quiet aftermath, Captain White gathered his senior officers. "Something has changed," he told them. "This ship, I don't think it's ours anymore." Back in the apartment, Marcus looked at the old engineer with wide eyes. What did he mean by that? Robert's face was grim. The Thunderbolt was designed to bend reality. But somewhere along the way, reality began to bend it back. The Element X wasn't just a power source or a material. It was something alive, something ancient. And it was waking up. "Is that why they erased it from history?" Jane asked. "Partly," Robert nodded. "But mostly because of what happened next. Because after Tau Ceti, the Thunderbolt disappeared for 3 days. And when it came back, he took a deep breath. It wasn't a human ship anymore. Outside, the night sky flickered briefly, as if a shadow had passed over the stars. "We need to move," Robert said suddenly, standing up. "They've found us." "Who?" Marcus asked. "The ones who still watch for the Thunderbolt. The ones who know it's coming back." He looked at Marcus and Jane with urgency. "We need to find a secure place. I need to tell you about the disappearance, before it's too late." They found shelter in an abandoned mining station very deep in the mountains. Robert moved with the confidence of someone who had prepared escape routes long ago. After the Battle of Tau Ceti, Robert continued once they were safe. The Thunderbolt vanished. Just disappeared from all tracking systems. Captain White reported the ship had entered lightspeed headed for Earth, but we never arrived. "Where did you go?" Marcus asked. Robert's eyes took on a distant look. "Somewhere beyond." The ship took control and jumped into what looked like a tear in space itself. We found ourselves in a region of empty darkness. No stars, no planets, nothing but the Thunderbolt floating in the void. For 3 days, the crew was trapped inside the ship as it underwent its transformation. The hull began to reshape itself. New structures grew from the walls. The Element X core expanded throughout the vessel like veins in a living body. We could hear it thinking. Robert whispered. Not with words, but with feelings, images. Some of the crew went mad. Others became almost worshipful. Captain White ordered us to the escape pods, but they had been absorbed back into the hull. Jane leaned forward. "Did the ship talk to you?" Robert nodded slowly. On the 3rd day, it spoke to Captain White. Not out loud, but directly into his mind. The rest of us only saw him standing in front of the core, tears streaming down his face. When Captain White finally turned back to his crew, his eyes were different. He had seen something that had changed him forever. The Element X, he told them, is a fragment of a consciousness that existed before our universe began. It was trapped here when reality formed around it. For billions of years, it slept. Our experiments woke it up. The ship had been using the battles against the Dominion to understand its own capabilities. Each engagement taught it more about manipulating the fabric of reality. Each victory made it stronger. The more it fought, the more it remembered what it once was. And now, Captain White had said, it wants to go home. When the Thunderbolt reappeared near Earth 3 days after vanishing, it was barely recognizable. Its hull had transformed into a dark, shifting material that seemed to absorb light. Its shape had become more fluid, with curves and angles that seemed to change as you looked at them. Military command was alarmed by the changes. They ordered the ship to dock at the Jupiter Defense Station for inspection. Captain White relayed the orders, but he already knew the Thunderbolt would not comply. "We can't control it anymore," he reported. "It follows our suggestions only when they align with its own goals." Admiral Parker demanded to know what had happened during the 3 missing days. Captain White's report was classified at the highest level, with only 3 people allowed to read it. All 3 later insisted it be destroyed. "What did the report say?" Marcus asked. Robert looked troubled. "I never saw it, but one of the officers who read it killed himself the next day. Another resigned and disappeared into the outer colonies. The 3rd was Admiral Parker. He's the one who gave the order to erase the Thunderbolt from history." The military leadership was divided on what to do. Some wanted to study the ship, hoping to unlock more of its technology. Others feared it posed an existential threat, not just to humanity, but to reality itself. Dr. Reed was brought in to examine the transformed vessel. His findings only deepened the mystery. "It's no longer just bending the laws of physics," he reported. "It's rewriting them in its immediate vicinity. The element X has spread throughout the entire structure. The ship isn't powered by element X anymore. It has become element X." More disturbing were the reports from the crew. They spoke of dreams shared by everyone aboard, visions of vast, empty spaces between universes, of entities that existed as pure thought, of a hunger to return to that state. Captain White began to show signs of the mental strain. In his private communications with Admiral Parker, he confessed his fears. "The ship is using us," he wrote. "It needs human minds to understand this reality, to learn how to escape it. Once it knows enough, it won't need us anymore." Despite these warnings, the war with the Dominion was still raging. Earth was losing colonies and needed every advantage. The decision was made to deploy the Thunderbolt for one final mission, to strike at the heart of Dominion space and force an end to the conflict. "It was a mistake," Robert said quietly. "The ship didn't care about winning the war anymore. It had its own plans." The final mission began with the Thunderbolt leading a fleet of 50 human warships deep into enemy territory. Their target was the Dominion homeworld, a heavily defended planet that had never faced direct attack. As they approached the system, the Thunderbolt suddenly accelerated, leaving the human fleet behind. It plunged toward the planet alone, facing hundreds of defensive ships. What happened next was, Robert paused, struggling for words. It wasn't a battle. It was an unmaking. The Thunderbolt didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, it created a ripple in space-time that spread outward like a wave. Where it passed, matter simply ceased to exist. Ships, defense platforms, even portions of the planet's surface, all vanished, leaving behind perfect emptiness. "The Dominion surrendered immediately," Robert said. "Their leaders begged for peace. They had seen what the Thunderbolt could do, and they knew they couldn't fight it. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the victory felt hollow to those who understood what the Thunderbolt had become." "We weren't controlling a weapon," Robert explained. "We were being used by something beyond our understanding, something that had its own purpose." After the surrender, military command ordered the Thunderbolt to return to Earth. Captain White acknowledged the order, but privately told Admiral Parker, "I don't think it's coming back to stay. It's coming back to say goodbye." In the present, Marcus looked at the old engineer with a mix of awe and horror. "So what happened when it returned to Earth?" Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking at the night sky. "When we got back, Admiral Parker had assembled a fleet to escort the Thunderbolt to Jupiter for decommissioning. 12 of our most powerful warships surrounded us. They were there to study the ship, they said. But really, they were there to destroy it if necessary," Jane said, understanding. Robert nodded. They had developed weapons based on what they'd learned from Element X. Not as powerful as the Thunderbolt, but enough to damage it, they hoped. "And did they use them?" Marcus asked. "They never got the chance." Robert turned back to them, his face grim. "Because that's when the Thunderbolt showed us what it had really become. That's when it took us all into the darkness between worlds." A distant rumble shook the ground beneath them. Robert's expression changed to one of urgency. "We need to move again. They're getting closer." "Who's after us?" Marcus demanded. "The Watchers," Robert replied. "The organization Admiral Parker created after the Thunderbolt disappeared. They've been preparing for its return for 175 years. "Return?" Jane's voice was barely a whisper. "You think it's coming back?" Robert looked at them, both with solemn eyes. "It never left. Not completely. And now, it's finally ready to finish what it started." They fled deeper into the mountains as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Unmarked aircraft swept the valleys with searchlights, and armed figures moved through the forests below. "We need to reach the old military bunker," Robert said as they climbed. "It's shielded against tracking signals. We'll be safe there." When they finally reached the bunker, a rusted door built into the mountainside, Robert placed his hand on a hidden scanner. The door slid open with a groan of ancient mechanisms. Inside, screens lit up automatically. A computer system, old but well-maintained, hummed to life. "This is a Watcher outpost," Marcus realized, looking at the symbol on the wall. A stylized eye within a triangle. Robert corrected. "I'd repurposed it. Some of us who served on the Thunderbolt never truly joined the Watchers. We formed our own group, preparing for the ship's return in a different way." "What happened to the Thunderbolt?" Jane asked, her voice quiet but insistent. "You said it disappeared." Robert nodded and sat heavily in a chair. "Let me tell you about the last day. After the final battle, the Thunderbolt was escorted by 12 battleships to Jupiter. The plan was to dock it at a special facility where it could be studied and, if necessary, destroyed. We all knew it wouldn't happen that way," Robert said. The ship had become something else entirely. Captain White had changed too. He barely spoke anymore. His eyes had a faraway look, like he was listening to something none of us could hear. As they approached Jupiter, all 13 ships suddenly stopped. Not gradually, as with normal deceleration, but instantly, as if time itself had paused. "The stars around us, blurred," Robert recalled. "Reality seemed to bend inward, like we were at the center of a collapsing bubble." Then Captain White stood up from his command chair and said, "It's time." What happened next was witnessed only by those aboard the 13 ships, all of whom vanished. The only record came from a long-range observation post near Saturn, which captured a brief, blinding flash of light before all 13 vessels disappeared completely. For months, Earth's military searched the area, finding no debris, no radiation signature, nothing to indicate what had happened or where the ships had gone. Then, 3 months later, a small shuttle appeared near Earth. Inside was Captain Thomas White, alone, barely alive, and mentally broken. "I was part of the team that debriefed him," Robert said. Or tried to. He couldn't form coherent sentences anymore. Just fragments, phrases that didn't make sense. But one thing he said clearly just before he died: "It has gone beyond. It has transcended. And it may return." After White's death, Admiral Parker made the decision. Every record of the Thunderbolt was to be erased. Its technology was too dangerous, its power too great, and what it had become was too terrifying to comprehend. The official story became that the war ended through conventional victories and diplomatic agreements, Robert explained. The Thunderbolt never existed. Element X was classified as a failed experiment. The crew were listed as casualties of various battles throughout the war. "But what really happened to the ships?" Marcus asked. "And the crews?" Robert's hands trembled slightly. "The Thunderbolt took us. Outside. Outside our universe. I saw it for just a moment before I was ejected in an escape pod, a vast emptiness between realities. And in that emptiness, giant presences, entities of pure thought and energy." "The Thunderbolt's home," Jane whispered. Robert nodded. "The consciousness inside Element X had been trapped in our universe for billions of years. When we built the ship around it, we gave it a way to interact with our reality, to learn about it. Each battle taught it more about manipulating space-time, and eventually it figured out how to tear a hole between worlds and return to where it came from." "Why did it take the other ships?" Marcus asked. "Study specimens," Robert said grimly. "It wanted to bring examples of our technology, our biology, our minds, to understand us better." "And White? How did he get back?" "He was sent back, as a messenger. But the experience broke him." Robert looked up at them, his eyes haunted. "I was lucky. My escape pod was ejected early in the process. I drifted for weeks before being found. By then, the cover-up had already begun. Outside the bunker, The sounds of the search grew fainter as the Watchers moved to a different area. For 175 years, two groups have been preparing, Robert continued. The Watchers, who believe the Thunderbolt is a threat that must be destroyed if it returns, and people like me, who believe it's coming back for a reason, to offer us something. What could it offer? Jane asked. Evolution, transcendence, a path beyond our current existence. Robert stood and walked to a screen showing a star map. Look. The screen zoomed in on a region of space near Pluto. A strange distortion was visible, like a ripple in the fabric of reality. It started forming 3 days ago, Robert said, getting larger every hour. The Watchers have detected it too. That's why they're hunting us now. They're afraid we'll try to communicate with whatever is coming through. Is it the Thunderbolt? Marcus asked, staring at the ripple. Not exactly. Robert touched the screen, his finger tracing the outline of the distortion. The Thunderbolt was just a shell, a temporary vessel. What's coming back is the consciousness that inhabited it, and it's bringing others. Others? Entities like itself, interested in our reality. Robert turned to them, his face solemn. They're not hostile. They're curious. They want to understand us, just as we want to understand them. How can you be sure? Jane asked. Because I've carried a piece of the ship's consciousness with me since that day, Robert said quietly. A fragment of Element X, embedded here. He tapped his temple. It's how I've lived so long, how I know what's coming. The screens around them suddenly flickered. Outside, the night sky lit up as if dawn had arrived early. It's starting, Robert whispered, his face filled with awe. The bunker shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The computer systems went haywire, displays showing impossible readings. What's happening? Marcus shouted over the growing rumble. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile they had seen from him. History, the next chapter of human existence. The walls of the bunker seemed to become transparent. Through them, they could see the night sky split open, revealing the swirling vortex of energy and light. Within that vortex, shapes moved, vast, incomprehensible forms that shifted and flowed like living thought. They're here, Robert said, tears streaming down his face. The secret pages of history are being written now. And at the center of the vortex, a familiar shape emerged, the dark, sleek form of the Thunderbolt. But it had changed again, evolved into something even more alien and beautiful. Is it still a ship? Jane asked, her voice filled with wonder. No, Robert answered as the light grew brighter, enveloping them. It's a doorway, an invitation, the beginning of humanity's journey beyond the stars. The mountain around them dissolved into light. The last thing Marcus saw before reality shifted was Robert extending his hand toward the vortex, his face peaceful at last. They're not here to conquer, Robert's voice echoed as the world transformed around them. They're here to welcome us home. The light flashed once, brilliantly, and then Earth's night sky returned to normal. But it would never be the same again. The human warship so strong it was lost to history had returned, not as a weapon of war, but as the first page in humanity's next great chapter.